Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 18th of July, 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. Boris.
No, well, actually, this is more than Boris. This little section, I think, is about failed government, failed state, I think we're living in at the moment, Brian. And it's increasingly clear that no matter how anybody moves, whatever direction they move, it ends up in just as big a hole as we're in at the moment. So we'll start off with with Boris, because really breach of the rules. We had breached the rules the other day when the white paper the statement on the white paper was being given by Dominic Raab, because the white paper hadn't been distributed to the Labour Party or other opposition members of Parliament in time for them actually to read it and have some questions to ask. Here we've got more breach of the rules. Boris Johnson has decided that he's going to take up his post with the Telegraph again, writing a weekly column. I believe it's a weekly column. He gets paid £275,000 a year for this, Brian. I think that's pretty good. I think we need to up our subscription rate here at the UK column, because we're clearly not paid enough. Yes. Anyway, £275,000 what he's paid for this. But don't worry, because he's giving Theresa the chance to run away from the Commons today before he gives his resignation speech. I'm not sure whether he's done that yet. Didn't get the chance to look at that before we came on air. But it's just ridiculous that he is in breach of the ministerial code, which says that he's supposed to wait three months after he leaves office and before he takes up any other post or any other position. So the Code of Conduct requires ministers to apply to the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments before accepting a new job. He didn't do that either, so he didn't wait for the 3 months, and he didn't apply to the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments. Now he's not saying anything about it, but the spokesperson for the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments said that Boris Johnson had not approached the committee for advice before accepting the job. So, it's a rule, it's being broken. Is there any difference between this being broken and international law being broken when we bomb countries? I don't think there is, really.
Well, not as far as they're concerned, and the rules are for us. They're not for members of Parliament in any shape or form. That's pretty clear. So let's talk about another rule that was broken, because yesterday, of course, Theresa May narrowly defeated the rebels over the Brexit trade bill. Apparently, she won that vote by 4 votes this time, and that was mainly because, well, some Labour Party people decided to vote on her side once again. She won, 6 votes this time. 4 of them were Labour votes. 307 to 301 is how that particular event turned out. But today they were accused of cheating, because, they have this rule in Parliament where if they can pair off, if people on the other side of the vote can pair off, which means that they don't have to go and actually vote, then it speeds up the voting process and so on. And in this case, what was supposed to happen was that Joe Swinson from the Liberal Democrats was supposed to pair off with Brandon Lewis from the Conservative Party. So Brandon Lewis obviously voting with the government, Joe Swinson not voting with the government. But unfortunately, she's wagging her finger here at the Tories, because, Brandon Lewis ignored the agreement and went and voted, and then she obviously wasn't in a position to vote. So they're cheating again, and then it gets worse, because at the end, following the vote yesterday, according to the Huffington Post here, Jeremy Corbyn came under attack, because the Labour Party, of course, has decided to redefine anti-Semitism within the party rules. They're not following the international standard for the definition of anti-Semitism anymore. And Margaret Hodge decided that she would attack Jeremy Corbyn in the House of Commons. Now, apparently, the Speaker of the House didn't quite hear what was going on, but she basically said to Jeremy, I think it was more of a scream, really, at him. You're an effing anti-Semite and a racist, is what she said, in front of multiple witnesses. Apparently Jeremy Corbyn was quite calm about it. He said, I'm sorry you feel like that. She was aggressive, according to one witness. Jeremy was calm. Other MPs who were there were upset by it. So this, of course, is in breach of parliamentary rules as well.
Keir Starmer then has stepped in on this whole issue of whether Theresa May can continue in government, because he's saying Labour will never support Theresa May's flawed Brexit blueprint. In fact, that's not quite true, because in the last several votes over the last couple of days, it's only the fact that some Labour Party members who happen to support Brexit decided to step in and vote on Theresa May's side that she's managed to carry the vote. But anyway, Keir Starmer saying that this is an article that he has written for the Mirror. He's saying, like many of you have watched with anger, frustration and despair at the government's handling of Brexit. Shambles is an overused word in politics, but over the past week, the Tories have brought a whole new meaning to the word. At the start of the month, cabinet ministers travelled to the Prime Minister's country retreat finally to discuss their plan for Brexit. It had taken the government 2 years to get to that point. The plan then unravelled within a matter of days. Senior members of the government resigned, and to top it all off, she tried to order MPs to go home early for summer to avoid any further embarrassment. Well, they've now decided to drop that idea. They're not going to put a motion in to try to get Parliament to break up a week before the end of the school term, as it were. In the meantime, Anna Soubry, a supporter of Theresa May, has been speaking on Radio 4 Today programme this morning, complaining bitterly about who's actually running the country. Is it Theresa May, or is it the so-called Brexit campaigners within her party? These nonsenses, she said, of threatening general elections and votes of confidence in the Prime Minister, and I actually said to the Deputy Chief Whip, bring it on, because I'll be the first in the queue to give my vote of full confidence to the Prime Minister. The problem is I don't think she's in charge anymore. I've no doubt that Jacob Rees-Mogg is running our country. She said that I personally would abandon the Labour front bench and would reach beyond it, and I would encompass Plaid Cymru, the SNP and other sensible, pragmatic people who believe in putting this country's interests first and foremost, as she called for a government of national unity. So she's effectively suggesting that, you know, the government gives up its place and it's replaced with a government of national unity and people from other parties brought into the front bench team. Nicholas Soames saying exactly the same thing this morning as well to Channel 4 News. He thinks there should be, or there could be, a government of national unity by the end of the year. And in the meantime, of course, other rules allegedly being broken, or at least have been decided that have been broken, which is vote leave, facing a police investigation after being fined £61,000 for breaching electoral rules. Electoral law. Vote leave has been hit, according to RT here, with a £61,000 and referred to the police after the Electoral Commission found it overspent its campaigning limit by almost £500,000 as it joined forces with other pro-Brexit groups. So they are alleged to, or it's claimed they spent £500,000 over the limit. They get fined £61,000 for it. Okay. So where does that leave us, Brian? It leaves us in a mess, ungovernable, effectively, and it seems that no matter which direction it's proposed to go in, the situation doesn't get any better. So
it's not designed to. My belief is that this is organised chaos, this is orchestrated chaos, this is deliberately planned chaos in order to collapse the whole decision-making process. And then behind the scenes, we've got a criminal cabal running the country, and they're simply driving through the policy they want. There never was any intent for Brexit.
Absolutely. So yesterday they were talking about this so-called vote leave scandal in the House of Commons yesterday, and this is what Nicholas Soames had to say.
Will she agree with me that one of the great glories of this sadly now diminished country was our electoral and democratic system? Yeah. And this example today is gross. And I say to her that if we are to retain the integrity and the trust of the voting public, the whole damn thing needs to be blown up and started all over again.
Yeah, but that would only work if all 650 of them are in there at the time.
At the time,
yes.
Yeah. But the plan moves ahead, so government of national unity, that's your one-party state. And of course, it isn't the MPs that are producing the policy. We're going to have a look at a bit of this in a moment. So we've got people behind closed doors deciding that policy. Well, MPs, many people would say not very bright. sorry, just come back on this, picked up on this individual. This is Ben Bradshaw. Devon Live with a very interesting little article. It says Brexit won't happen and here is why. This is what Ben Bradshaw, the Labour MP for Exeter, said about Brexit in his column sent to devonlive.com exactly 12 months ago. So let's have a look at what he had to say. I'm going to make a bold prediction. Brexit won't happen. There, I've said it. It's what a lot of people are thinking and many hoping but not saying for fear of appearing undemocratic. Let me explain my reasoning for this prediction. And he goes on, I've always thought there was a good chance Brexit wouldn't happen once the British people were faced with a terrible negotiation and an even worse deal. But the general election and its aftermath have brought that moment forward. So I'd like to label this, if I can get on screen here, prediction or deliberate plan for chaos to stop Brexit at any cost. And Ben Bradshaw, very interesting man, because of course formerly he was a BBC radio presenter. He was the man who crowed that the Berlin Wall was coming down and that was the end of the nasty communists, and all of a sudden the Cold War had disappeared. But here we are. Apparently that's not true, because those nasty Russians are back behind everything, including meddling allegedly in UK and US politics. So what do you think, Mike? Was this a prediction by Mr. Ben Bradshaw, or was it actually knowledge that this was the ultimate plan?
And maybe he'd just been watching UK column news.
Maybe. Well, anyway, we know Brexit is not happening, and one of the key things going on in the background is EU military unification. I'd like to say thank you very much to the eagle-eyed UK column viewer who spotted this one. UK military support to France, written statement made on the 18th of July 2018, made by Gavin Williamson, Secretary of State for Defence. I wish to update the House on the deployment of 3 CH-47 Chinook heavy lift helicopters to Mali to support French operations in the Sahel region, which I announced in a written ministerial statement on the 18th of January. All aircraft and personnel have now deployed and flying operations will begin shortly. We're committed to supporting our French allies in this armed conflict, combating terrorism and instability, as well as strengthening our military cooperation with one of our closest allies. So there we are, British taxpayers' money. We're supposed to be coming out of the European Union. We're supposed to be regaining control of our nation state and of course our military. But no, what's happening in the background is that we are fully integrating, unifying military wherever possible, particularly with the French. It's quite remarkable stuff, Mike.
Well, and of course the treaties with the French and others don't just apply to the military. You know, this is one of the most interesting aspects of this whole chaotic discussion on Brexit, because, okay, there's focus on the main treaties, the customs union and so on, but at no point is there any discussion about these other smaller treaties that exist around the edges, which actually are extremely important to the overall picture.
Because they lock us in.
They lock us in, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, for those people who are not familiar with the Sahel area, I thought we'd just have a little look at a map on screen. So essentially this is a boundary area of, I apologise for the use of square kilometres there, 3.053, sorry, that should be million square kilometres. And a large number of countries are taken in this area. So we know that helicopters are going to one particular location, central Mali. But I just wanted to ask the question, what are they actually up to out here? So we will see. One of the things that UK Column has been pushing at our viewers and listeners for some time now is we are suffering the consequences, but who is making the policy? And as we've just heard at the start of our news today, the British government is descending into chaos, but somebody behind the scenes is still pulling the strings and making the decisions. Let's have a look at this organisation, which was flagged up to us a couple of days ago, the Horizon Scanning Programme Team. Horizon Scanning is about exploring what the future might look like to understand uncertainties better. And the UK government is is crowing about this in quite a number of places. So apparently it's not about making predictions, but systematically investigating evidence about future trends. Horizon scanning apparently helps government to analyse whether it's adequately prepared for potential opportunities and threats. And this helps to ensure that policies are resilient to different future environments. So we've got a horizon scanning programme team coordinating strategic horizon scanning work across departments, drawing on insights from experts in and outside governments to challenge our thinking. So note there that we're bringing in experts from outside government. Who are these experts? Not easy to see, but we're going to work on this and see whether we can pin some of them down at least. But here's the Horizon team, responsible for coordinating work between departments and input from those experts outside the civil service, creating communities of interest around specific topics, improving cross-government horizon scanning, developing networks to gather and share information, bringing emerging issues to a senior level audience. So this is really incredible stuff. It's working on government policy, but they say, well, it isn't really. Let's have a look at the detail. How has this thing come about? Well, prior to 2014, we had a Cabinet Office Horizon Scanning Secretariat, and we had a Government Office of Science Horizon Scanning Centre. They merged March 2014, and that produced the Horizon Scanning Programme team. We've got a steering group, which is the Cabinet Secretary's Advisory Group. And if you don't know what these organisations are, I'm going to say we didn't until recently. Research it yourself, because there's a lot of questions to be asked here. So here's the overall chair. It's our old friend Jeremy Haywood, immensely powerful individual within government and the civil service. And the overall minister, the Right Honourable David Lidington, CBE MP. Now he's the Duchy
of Lancaster.
treasurer.
Yeah.
So that's a very important role. Previously, he was BP and another pretty high profile global company. So what takes place in these organisations? Well, we're only now starting to get a glimpse, but what we can say with certainty is that they are closely tied in with what was the government's behavioural insights team, and this was the British government using applied psychology in order to change the way people thought, think and behave. And apparently this organisation has had its own 10 commandments. So we've got a Dr. John Carney here, the principal scientist within the Systems Thinking and Consulting Group, the Defence Science and Technology Lab. But he's previously been team leader for Horizon Scanning. He had this to say: don't think that horizon scanning is about predicting the future. This is a common misconception. The value of horizon scanning is using it to change mindsets. So that's a pretty powerful statement there, that these people, not all of them are in government, certainly not put in position of power via a democratic process, but they're working to change our mindsets. But we're not actually told how those mindsets are going to be changed. A little quip under the picture of him is that on his T-shirt in that picture, it says, "Not all who wander are lost," and this is loosely attributed to Tolkien. It says so in the caption. So we've got another little bit here. Is this partly where the government policy is now coming from? JRR Tolkien? I don't know. It could be Harry Potter, of course. But this is the sort of stuff they're getting up to. And the bottom one here caught my attention: social attitudes of young people. We can find one of their papers here. The interesting thing about this paper is that there's no authors mentioned on it. So they don't seem to want to say who actually put the thing together in any detail. But down at the bottom it says in capitals, "This is not a statement of government policy." Now this is a very interesting claim, because of course this material is clearly being used as the basis for government policy. So what sort of thing are they saying? They say in some areas we see little change in young people's attitudes, behaviours and experience compared to older generations. For instance, when we ask people of different ages what's important in life, we find remarkably little difference between generations. Similarly, we see little evidence of generational shifts in willingness to justify selfish behaviour, such as tax and benefit fraud. An amazing label to stamp on a future generation, or appetite for being involved in community engagement. These areas where there are few, if any, changes between generations remind us that we should not overstate the possible changes over the next 10 years in young people's attitudes, behaviours and experience. So clearly the government working behind the scenes to change the way that young people think. And it goes on here, and I found this staggering. As well as shaping evolving attitudes, we would expect to see continued changes in the behaviours and experiences of young people in the next 10 years. One way this could occur would be through an intensification of the trend towards longer routes and more complex routes to full adulthood and independence.
What does that mean?
Well, I've read it several times, Mike. What I pick up from this is that they're talking about delaying people becoming adult.
But how can they delay people becoming adults when they sexualize them at ever younger ages and push more and more adult themes onto ever younger children?
Well, that's occurring at one end of the spectrum, but of course the other thing that's actually happening is you're seeing, for example, in some social services documents, that even where somebody has got to the age of 21 or 26, they are still deemed to be under the control of the state. What I picked up from this is it's almost like the state is expecting us to be children in the eyes of the state, and anything they can do to increase the childish behaviour will continue. If we go to the other extreme, we could say that years ago we had people at the age of 16 doing some really important work within apprenticeships. They had to turn up work, they had to have the right tools, the right skills to do a skillful job. Many youngsters now at the age of 16 are still effectively playing games. But who knows who devised the policy. And on the back of that, I'm going to thank this viewer for getting in contact with us. The email was this: Dear Brian, don't know if this is of any interest. The summer reading challenge in libraries this year is based on the Beano. You know, Dennis the Menace and Beryl the Peril. But the staff have been told not to use the words peril or menace when speaking to the children. This disturbed me, so I started to look into it. It is all the work of the Reading Agency, and their partners include the British Council and the BBC. Funders include the Cabinet Office Social Action Fund and the Wellcome Trust. There are evaluation forms and a family survey the staff seem to complete, but details are only available to the staff. Trawling around the site, I found the Public Library Universal Health offer from the SCL, all very creepy. SCL organised the shelf help books training young children in anxiety, depression, self-harm, body image, eating disorders and bullying. And so it goes on. This is sort of part of the material this particular lady was looking at, and I can see why she's concerned about it. And let's bring in the vision of the Reading Agency. Reading for pleasure enhances people's literacy, life chances and quality of life. It's vital for prosperity. But number two here, libraries aim to be a force for social change through reading. They bring people recreation and pleasure, learning, literacy, health and well-being. So we know this is linked up with the Cabinet Office, and here we can now see that libraries themselves are aiming to be a force for social change.
And they're using childish material to do that.
And they're using childish material.
Yeah.
And this was the second part of this presentation. I've just shown that first slide, and I couldn't help but see this. Libraries reading work helps local authorities achieve key outcomes. So this is nothing about assisting the individual. This is about assisting a local authority to achieve its outcomes. And those outcomes have been set by the Cabinet Office and central government. And I'll just end on this one, which was also sent to us. This is Rhondda Borough Council, which is looking for somebody to fulfil a contract. They want a well-being game, and the well-being game will be for ages 6 to 14 years. This product will support school pupils to reflect on well-being. It will involve pupils reflecting upon their well-being profile and complete real-world activities to help them develop within a well-being context. The main aim of the well-being game is through gamification to enable pupils to reflect on their personal well-being profile and to engage in real-world challenges that will help them build personal strength and character. Pupils' well-being challenges will then be linked to the virtual world to promote engagement. With many young children committing suicide in South Wales, I don't get a warm feeling about that contract which is being offered, and particularly when we can see, or we're getting closer to seeing, the real detail of the links back into the Cabinet Office itself and outside agencies that are helping the British government form policy.
Okay, now the all-party parliamentary group on drones has issued its report, and if you don't remember what this is about, let's just watch this short piece of video that introduces the inquiry in the first place.
I'm Professor Michael Clark, and I'm chairing the all-party parliamentary group inquiry into the use of drones. We're running this inquiry because the technology of drones is just about to enter a new phase. It's the beginning of a real technological revolution. The government says that it understands exactly what the moral questions are in relation to war zones, and it does, but increasingly we find our forces are being drawn outside war zones. The Joint Committee on Human Rights has already published a report saying that the government's very ambiguous on how it uses drones for targeted killings outside war zones. The government's replied to that report, but the reply, says the Joint Committee, is really inadequate, and a whole series of issues have not been addressed.
Okay, so that little introductory video was produced 2 years ago. The inquiry has been going on for 2 years. They have just released the report, and here it is, the UK's use of armed drones, working with partners. It's available on the All Parliamentary Party Group inquiry website. You can get hold of that there. And they're saying that the use of armed drones is, one of the key points that they're making here is the issue of whether the UK and its use of drones is actually in breach of international law or not. So let's have a look at a couple of key quotes from this. A correct determination of whether a targeted individual is a fighter within an organised armed group that the UK is involved in an armed conflict with is also important for another reason: the risks related to the prosecution of UK personnel, targeting of civilians, persons who are not members of armed groups in situations of armed conflict, constitutes a war crime which is subject to prosecution domestically and before international courts, including the International Criminal Court. They say, let's see.
It will come up.
Yeah. Where is it? Yes, here we are. Where strikes are conducted in armed conflict and persons who are also civilians are targeted, this may amount to a war crime. Also, the risk of prosecution may be present where drone strikes occur outside the situations of armed conflict. And as he was highlighting in this, in that short video clip at the beginning there, this is something that they were particularly concerned about, the use of drones outside situations of armed conflict. So let's go on then. It says, the possibility of criminal prosecution for complicity in murder also arises for all those UK personnel who have a role in assisting or facilitating the use of lethal force by coalition allies, such as the United States, which has a much wider approach to the use of lethal force outside of armed conflict. Such assistance might take the form of logistical support, for example, permitting US jets to use UK air bases, or the provision of intelligence about targets gathered by UK surveillance and reconnaissance. So they're not mincing the words here, Brian. The risks of Britain having been involved in and continuing to be involved in what would be considered war crimes, and the risks of Britain operating outside international law are absolutely highlighted. Well, I think this is a pretty important report, and there should be some much more coverage of it, perhaps, than there is at the moment?
I would certainly agree with that. We have no idea what the government is doing in many overseas countries. Take the 3 Chinook helicopters. What will they be used to do, supporting our, inverted commas, French allies?
Yes. In the meantime, let's move on to the issue of Russia interference in elections that Brian mentioned earlier. Well, a couple of days ago, Maria Butina in the United States was arrested and charged for involvement in infiltrating political groups and getting involved in trying to affect elections. Well, I was a little surprised. Maybe it's a badge. To be a Russian spy, you've got to have red hair, Brian, because if we remember a couple of years ago, Anna Chapman, the other Russian spy operating in the United States that was arrested at the time, also a redhead. I don't know whether this is a prerequisite for the job or something, but anyway, why am I mentioning this? Because Craig Murray was tweeting out this morning about Ms. Butina. He said, every country does precisely this kind of thing to attempt to influence the policies of other countries. Have been involved myself. The United States does more than any other country because they have the most resources. Massive hypocrisy by the United States in charging Ms. Butina, and he pointed out this WikiLeaks leak, CIA espionage orders for the 2012 French presidential election. Brian, this is something that Britain, the United States, every country in the world is involved in, and to suggest that Russia is doing anything outside the norm is ridiculous.
Russia is alone in doing it is ridiculous. Well, it's also gross hypocrisy, which is something that comes up continually with the UK and the US government at the moment.
Well, let's go on with some gross hypocrisy. So here we go. The second Novichok 2, the sequel, continues to get more ridiculous. So this is a Mail Online headline, and they're claiming an exclusive here. Novichok victim Dawn Sturgis died after spraying nerve poison that smelled of ammonia from a perfume bottle onto both wrists, her boyfriend reveals. So this is apparently Charlie Rowley, who's still critically ill in hospital, has had a telephone call with his brother. Didn't Miss Skripal have a telephone call with her sister? Wasn't that something, or cousin? Something was going on there. She did
indeed, yeah.
So lots of information going out via telephone calls while people are apparently critically ill in hospital. Apparently Charlie has remembered that Dawn had sprayed the perfume on both her wrists, and he also vaguely recollects there being an odd ammonia type smell from the bottle. Now, in any of the coverage that I've seen about the potential smells associated with Novichok, ammonia was never one of them. Possibly chocolatey sort of smell and so on, but not ammonia. But anyway, the key thing that here from this story apparently is that they had been walking through the centre of Salisbury pretty close to where the Skripals had been found, apparently, and that they had found this bottle of perfume, is what this article is attempting to claim, and that they took the bottle of perfume home, where Dawn then decided to spray her wrists with it. So they picked it up off the ground in the centre of Salisbury, close to where the Skripals had been. And apparently, despite the fact that all the areas that the Skripals had been allegedly searched by people in hazmat suits, this particular perfume bottle was not found, has sat around for several months, and has been picked up by Dawn Sturgis. And she then sprayed herself with it. Does this sound like a likely story?
It doesn't sound likely, it doesn't sound believable to me at all. But of course, my mind goes back to the fact we were told that it was absolutely certain that the Novichok had been put on the door handles of their house, and that they touched the military-grade nerve agent. They then went for a drink for a couple of hours and had a meal and then succumbed to it. Now we've got a woman spraying herself with Novichok from a perfume bottle.
Well, maybe the perfume was sprayed on the door handles.
Okay, all right, possibly. But to me, there's nothing clear about this story at all. And of course, we had no proper decontamination of the area in Salisbury immediately after the incident. There was no proper boundary secured. There was no search within that boundary. We had trucks and wagons and cars that had been involved with it. being transported freely across the city, and we even lost a couple of those vehicles for a few days before all of a sudden they were found. Then they had to be decontaminated. So an utter shambles, a pack of lies by the British government. I can accept people have died, I can accept that, and been seriously injured, but what exactly has driven this, I don't know. But to try and label it on the Russians, to me, does not seem to fit somehow. Well, let's come on to the subject of Britain's involvement in the psychiatric Gulag. And this is just a brief update on Peter Hofschröer that Alex Thompson in particular has been mentioning. And we've got a part of an email here which is giving us a little update, so I'll read this out. The message from Peter Hofschröer, the message Peter Hofschröer wanted to communicate when he left me a voicemail this morning was that there had been 2 cases featured in an article in Kronen Zeitung, which is, I believe, the largest Austrian newspaper, this weekend about male nurses at Peter's Hospital in Graz. One case covered was the suspension of 4 male nurses for mistreating patients. Peter has heard on the grapevine that a new recruit whistle blew on them in disgust. The other was a lady claiming her 82-year-old mother, who inexplicably had bruises and black eyes, was beaten up by 4 male nurses in the showers, the very scenario they were trying recently to instigate Peter into provoking so as to get the chemical kosh, i.e. to inject him. Every 2 or 3 days, Peter says, someone on his ward has a screaming fit, is dragged into a room by 20 nurses, half of whom have big grins on their faces because they're about to do someone over, and that person is forcibly injected. They're covered head to foot in tattoos and look like they've been recruited from the local nightclub, Peter just said to me. Director of Medicine Michael Lahofer promised a clear and transparent investigation into this pair of cases, speaking in the Kronen Zeitung article. There's also a comment later in the email that Dr. Meyer sneaked in, slunk around and sneaked out today, feeling the heat. So this is a reference to one of the senior doctors at that facility. Let's remember what's going on here. We've got a man who has been extricated from the UK via the psychiatric system. He's now been branded mentally ill without any proper diagnosis or any proper court proceedings, and he's locked up in an Austrian psychiatric unit in order to protect persons in UK involved with the abuse of children, it would appear. So this is the situation of Britain under Theresa May and the Conservatives in 2018. Can we trust them on Brexit? I don't think so. Can we trust them over the Salisbury poisoning incident? Certainly don't think so either. If the British government is prepared to go to these lengths to keep people quiet because of what they know. And what's the British government happy with behind the scenes? Well, this is something that several people have been flagging up to us over a number of weeks to do with the misuse of genetics. But here we've got The Guardian: genetically modified babies given the go-ahead by the UK ethics body. The Nuffield Council on Bioethics says changing the DNA of a human embryo could be morally permissible if it's in the child's best interest. You note there, Mike, the mismatch between the main heading and the start of the article, because even if we disagree with what the article is saying, they have not given the full go-ahead.
What's the definition of the child's best interests? I mean, for example, would blonde hair and blue eyes be considered to be
well,
in the child's best
this
interests?
is the worrying thing about all this. This is a couple of paragraphs from the article. The creation of babies whose DNA has been altered to give them what parents perceive to be the best chances in life has received a cautious green light in a landmark report from a leading UK ethics body. And here we are. The Nuffield Council on Bioethics said that changing the DNA of a human embryo could be morally permissible if it was in the best interest, and did not add to the kinds of equalities that already divide society. And it's that little thing that gives you the idea that actually they're looking for something wider than simply a medical corrective treatment for the child.
We're talking eugenics here?
We're talking eugenics. Now, this lady is quoted in the article, and she's picking up on this pretty strongly. She says they dispense with the usual pretense that this could, or in their estimation should, be prevented. They acknowledge that this may worsen inequality and social division, but they don't believe that should stand in the way. In practical terms, they have thrown down a red carpet for unrestricted use of inheritable genetic engineering and a gilded age in which some are treated as genetic haves and the rest of us are have-not. So Marcy Danovsky, this is an article in Leaps Mag, encourage people to track this down and have a look at some of the material that this lady's produced, because she is warning and warning of what is coming here very quickly. And this is part of this story in a wider context, because Leaps Mag here talking about hacking your own genes, a recipe for disaster, and they're focusing on a biohacker called Josiah Zayner, and they say he's hardly coy about his goals being larger than Popeye-like muscles. I want to live in a world where people are genetically modifying themselves, he told Farce Company. I think this is like literally a new era of human beings. It's going to create a whole new species of humans. And the article is pointing out that he's there in a laboratory messing around with this kind of technology. And in a quote to The Guardian, he says this, or it says this, I beg your pardon, yeah, Zayner is all for it. In an interview with The Guardian, he comments, DNA defines what a species is, and I can imagine it won't be too long into the future when the human species almost becomes a new species because of these modifications. We want to grow as a species and maybe change as a species, whether that is curing disease or immortality or mutant powers is up to you. So The Guardian pushing this very strongly.
That quote takes me right back to what you were saying a few minutes ago about adults behaving like children. This is pathetic. He's living in a dream world of Hollywood movies with mutant powers.
With mutant powers. And if you follow the line of the Guardian articles, I would say that the Guardian is helping to push the idea that all this is acceptable. This is all where the future's taking us. And if it wasn't for the lady scientist warning about where this is really going, where are these ideas coming from through into government, through the scientific panels, the horizon scanning, and then that's being formed into policy. And perhaps we'll just end on this one, which I had Melanie Shaw in mind, but the Mail here reporting that a transgender prisoner who was put in a female jail despite not having sex change surgery has sexually assaulted 4 women inmates. And have now been moved to a male prison. And what the article says is that there's about 125, 128 transgender people in UK jails. That's out of a total jail population of circa 80,000. But the state is now moving forward with this transhumanist agenda. This is where we're going. We're going to get rid of the true identity of male and female. You can cross over. You can be in between. You can be a woman one day and a man the next. And here we see that common sense has absolutely gone out of the window because what is essentially a man was put into a female prison with those disastrous consequences. So what are we seeing? Are we seeing a breakdown of intelligence, or are we seeing the effect of these new government change policies coming through? I personally think it's the latter.
Indeed.
Well, we'll end there for today. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will be back at the same time tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.